Captain Lee Minho walked into the massive council chamber with heavy steps. His boots made loud sounds on the smooth metal floor that stretched far ahead of him. The ceiling was so high he could barely see the top, and bright lights hung down like stars in a dark sky. Around him sat hundreds of alien beings from all across the galaxy. Each one looked different from the others, but they all had the same angry look in their eyes, the blue-skinned. Altarians sat in the front row, their long necks stretched up like angry snakes. They made hissing sounds through their translator boxes that turned their words into human language. The massive Gorvek delegates filled the back section of the chamber, their huge bodies taking up 3 seats each. When they got mad, they pounded their giant fists on the tables, making the whole room shake. Lee Minho had been to this chamber many times before, but today felt different. Today he was not here as a friend or ally. Today he was here as a criminal. At least that is what these aliens thought. The charges against humanity filled a datapad that was 3 inches thick. Violation of space protocols, unauthorized rescue operations, aggressive peacekeeping, interfering with natural selection. The list went on and on. The head of the council was a tall, thin being called Zephyr, who belonged to a race that looked like walking trees. His voice was deep and slow like wind through old branches. He began to read the charges against humanity one by one. Each word felt like a hammer blow to Lee Minho, who had spent his entire life protecting these same beings who now wanted to punish him. 50 years ago, humans had first entered this galaxy as explorers. They had small ships and big dreams, hoping to find new friends among the stars. What they found instead was a galaxy full of problems. Pirates attacked trade ships and stole everything they could carry. Ancient weapons from long-dead civilizations still worked and threatened to destroy entire star systems. Natural disasters struck worlds that had no way to protect themselves. Disease spread from planet to planet, killing millions. The other alien races in the galaxy were advanced in many ways. They had better technology than humans. They could travel faster between stars. They had weapons that could destroy planets and shields that could stop almost any attack. But they had one big problem. They were afraid to use any of it. When danger came, they would talk and debate and form committees. While people died, humans were different. When they saw someone in trouble, they helped right away. They did not wait for permission or ask for payment. They just acted. Captain Lee Minho remembered his first mission when he was just a young officer. A plague had broken out on a Gorvek mining world and was killing thousands every day. The Gorvek government was still debating what to do when human medical ships arrived with doctors and medicine. They worked day and night to save lives while the Gorvek officials argued about jurisdiction. That pattern repeated over and over again for 50 years. Humans became the galaxy's emergency response team when the Void Hunters first appeared near the Rim worlds. It was human ships that fought them back. When the Wraith pirates built their first major fleet, it was human intelligence that found their base and human soldiers who destroyed it. When the artificial intelligence on Kepler 7 went insane and tried to kill everyone on the planet, it was human hackers who shut it down. Every time humans acted fast and saved lives, but every time they also broke some rule or law or tradition. The aliens they saved would thank them at first, but then committees would form and investigations would start. The same people whose lives had been saved would complain that humans had not followed proper procedures. They said humans were too violent, too quick to fight, too willing to break rules. Lee Minho had watched his daughter Park Sora grow up on starships, moving from one crisis to another. She learned to fight before she learned to read, because there was always some new threat that needed to be stopped. He had seen his best friend Kim Dae-ho die defending an alien colony from raiders. The colony was saved, but 3 months later that same world banned humans from their space, saying they were too dangerous to be trusted. The breaking point came 6 months ago when humans saved the planet Zarian from complete destruction. An ancient weapon left behind by a dead civilization had started to activate. It would have killed every living thing on the planet within days. The local government was still trying to decide what to do when human engineers arrived. They worked for 72 hours without sleep to shut down the weapon and save 8 billion lives. The Galactic Council response was to formally censure humanity for unauthorized intervention. They said humans had no right to act without permission, even to save lives. They demanded that all future human actions be approved by a committee first. The committee would meet once per month and take at least 6 weeks to make any decision. Lee Minho looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him with anger and suspicion. These were the same beings whose people had died protecting the same ones who called for human help whenever danger appeared. The same ones who now wanted to chain humanity with rules and committees while people died waiting for permission to be saved. The Altarian delegate stood up, her blue skin turning purple with rage. She spoke in a high-pitched voice that the translator made sound like breaking glass. She accused humans of being warmongers who looked for excuses to fight. She said humanity was dangerous and needed to be controlled before they destroyed the galaxy. The Gorvak ambassador was next, his massive frame making the floor shake as he stood. He pointed one enormous finger at Lee Minho and declared that humans thought they were better than everyone else. He said they acted like they owned the galaxy and treated other races like children who needed protection. More voices joined in, creating a chorus of anger and fear. They accused humans of dozens of crimes, all centered around one basic complaint: humans acted without permission. They saved lives without asking first. They solved problems without waiting for committees. They were too quick to help and too willing to fight. Lee Minho listened to it all with a calm expression on his face. He had heard these complaints before, but never all at once and never with such hatred. Behind the anger he could see the real truth. These aliens were afraid not of humans but of their own weakness. They had grown dependent on human protection, and they hated themselves for it. When the accusations finally ended, the chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Lee Minho, waiting for his response. He could apologize and promise to follow their rules. He could argue and try to make them understand. He could negotiate and find some middle ground instead. He stood up slowly and spoke in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. We came to this galaxy as explorers, he said, his words falling like stones into still water. We became your protectors by choice, not by demand. For 50 years we have bled and died to keep you safe. We have sacrificed our own people to save yours. We have broken our own rules to follow what we thought was right. The chamber began to stir as aliens whispered to each other, but Lee Minho continued. You call us criminals for saving lives. You want us to ask permission before we act. You want committees to decide who lives and who dies while people suffer and die. Waiting for your decisions, you have made your choice clear. He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings he had once considered friends. Humanity withdraws from all galactic council operations effective immediately. We will no longer serve as your protectors. We will no longer clean up your messes. We will no longer die for people who call us criminals for trying to help. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some aliens shouted in anger, others in fear. A few tried to speak, but their voices were lost in the noise. Lee Minho turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the huge chamber. Behind him, the representatives of 1,000 worlds realized they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. As he reached the door, Lee Minho stopped and looked back one last time at the beings he had spent his life protecting. You wanted us to walk away, he said quietly. Now you will learn what the galaxy looks like without human protection. The door closed behind him with a sound like thunder. Within hours, human ships across the galaxy began receiving new orders: pack up, return to human space. Leave the aliens to face their problems alone. The galaxy had finally gotten what it asked for. It just had no idea what that really meant. Fleet Admiral Choi Ji-won sat in her command chair aboard the massive starship Taigek, watching the holographic display that showed the edge of human space. 6 months had passed since Captain Lee Minho walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the galaxy had been unusually quiet at first. The alien races seemed to think humans were bluffing, that they would come back once they cooled down. Then the distress signals started coming in. The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Lieutenant Commander Park Hyen was monitoring the long-range communications when his console lit up with incoming transmissions. He called Admiral Choi to the bridge, and together they listened to the desperate voice of a Xanthari military commander begging for human assistance. The Void Hunters had returned. The ancient machines that consumed entire star systems had awakened from their long sleep and were cutting through Xanthari space like a hot knife through butter. The Xanthari had fought them for 3 weeks using their most advanced weapons and had barely slowed them down. Entire fleets of Xanthari warships had been destroyed in minutes, leaving nothing but scrap metal floating in space. Admiral Choi listened to the transmission with a heavy heart. She remembered the Zenthari as proud warriors who had often criticized human tactics as too brutal and direct. They preferred elegant solutions and sophisticated strategies. Over the years they had filed dozens of complaints about human military actions, claiming that humans were too quick to destroy rather than negotiate now. Their elegant strategies were useless against an enemy that did not negotiate. The Void Hunters were machines left behind by a dead civilization programmed to consume all matter and energy in their path. They had no interest in talking or bargaining. They simply ate everything they encountered and moved on to the next target. The second distress call came from the Altarian homeworld. Admiral Choi recognized the voice as belonging to the same delegate who had accused humans of being warmongers just months earlier. Now that same voice was shaking with fear as she described the massive black ships that had appeared in their system. The Altarians had always been proud of their defensive technology. They had energy shields that could stop almost any attack and early warning systems that could detect threats from light years away, but their technology was designed to handle normal enemies, not the reality bending weapons of the Void Hunters. Their beautiful crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were being torn apart by gravity weapons that folded space itself. The Altarians had evacuated their outer colonies, but the Void Hunters were moving toward their core worlds with unstoppable momentum. Each ship they destroyed was replaced by two more that seemed to appear out of nowhere. More distress signals followed. The Gorvek Confederation was under attack by something called the Wraith Pirates, massive fleets of raiders who had appeared from the dark spaces between stars. The Gorvak had always been the galaxy's muscle. Their huge bodies and natural strength made them perfect soldiers, and they had kept the peace through intimidation for centuries. But the Wraith Pirates were different. They used tactics that the Gorvak had never seen before. Hit-and-run attacks that struck without warning and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Poison gas that killed even the mighty Gorvak in minutes. Cyber attacks that turned the Gorvak's own weapons against them. Lieutenant Commander Park Hyan analyzed the tactical data with growing alarm. The Wraith Pirates were using strategies that humans had developed years ago to fight similar enemies. The Gorvak had always refused to learn these tactics, claiming they were dishonorable and cowardly. Now they were paying the price for their pride. Dr. Yoon Neri, the fleet's expert on alien biology, studied the reports with scientific interest. She had spent decades learning about different alien species and their cultures. What she saw in the data shocked her. The galaxy's civilizations had become completely dependent on human protection without realizing it. For 50 years, humans had been the galaxy's early warning system. They had monitored the dark spaces where threats gathered and stopped them before they could organize. The Void Hunters had been stirring for decades, but human deep space patrols had contained them. The Wraith Pirates had been building their fleets in secret, but human intelligence had disrupted their operations. Now, with humans gone, these threats had been free to prepare without interference. The Void Hunters had awakened fully and begun their systematic consumption of the galaxy. The Wraith Pirates had finished building their massive fleets and launched their long-planned invasion. The timing was not coincidental. Dr. Yoon realized that the galaxy's enemies had been waiting for this moment. They had watched the political situation and seen the growing tension between humans and the other races. They had predicted that eventually the aliens would push too far and humans would withdraw. When that happened, they would be ready to strike. The most disturbing part was how quickly the alien civilizations were collapsing. The Zenthari, with all their advanced technology, had lasted only 3 weeks against the Void Hunters. The Altarians, who had ruled 100 star systems, were down to their last few worlds in less than a month. The Gorvik, who had never lost a major battle, were retreating on all fronts. Admiral Choi called a meeting of her senior staff to discuss the situation. The reports were clear. The galaxy was falling apart without human intervention. The question was what to do about it. Some officers wanted to help, arguing that innocent people were dying. Others insisted that the aliens had made their choice and now had to live with the consequences. Commander Nam Yoonji, who ran the intelligence division, presented the most disturbing information. The collapse was accelerating as news spread. Fear was spreading faster than the actual threats, as entire civilizations abandoned their worlds without even being attacked. Some species were choosing mass suicide rather than face the coming Darkness, the economic impact was just as bad. Trade routes that had connected the galaxy for thousands of years were shutting down as pirates and raiders made space travel. Impossible colonies that depended on imported food and medicine were starving. Entire industries were collapsing as workers fled their jobs to hide in bunkers. Lieutenant Commander Park Hyun showed them a map of the galaxy that updated in real time. Red zones marked areas under attack or already destroyed. Yellow zones were areas where fighting was happening. Orange zones were areas where the government had collapsed even without direct attack. Green zones were areas still under some kind of control. The map was mostly red with yellow and orange spreading outward like a disease. The few remaining green zones were shrinking every day. Most of them were heavily fortified core worlds where the last remnants of various governments had retreated. The outer colonies and frontier worlds had been abandoned completely. Admiral Choi made her decision with a heavy heart. She ordered all human ships to maintain their positions at the edge of human space. They would monitor the situation and gather intelligence, but they would not intervene. The galaxy had wanted humanity to step back, and now they would see what that really meant. The communications officer continued to receive distress signals, hundreds of them every day. The messages grew more desperate. As the days passed, proud civilizations that had ruled for millennia were reduced to begging for scraps of help. Some offered their entire treasuries for a single human warship. Others promised to become human colonies if humanity would just save their populations. Admiral Choi listened to each message but did not respond. The silence from human space was deafening, and it sent a clear message to the galaxy. The protection they had taken for granted was gone. The guardians who had watched over them for 50 years had walked away. As the weeks passed, the distress signals began to change. The aliens stopped asking for military help and started asking for evacuation. They no longer wanted humans to fight their battles. They just wanted someone to save their people from the spreading darkness. But even those requests went unanswered. The galaxy had spent 50 years complaining about human interference. Now they were learning what the galaxy looked like without it. The lesson was harsh, and the price was measured in billions of lives, but Admiral Choi knew that going back now would only repeat the same cycle. The aliens had to learn to stand on their own or fall trying. In the darkness of space, the Void Hunters continued their relentless advance. The Wraith pirates grew bolder with each victory. And in the silence between the stars, the galaxy began to understand that its greatest protectors were truly gone. Representative Jang Min-soo walked into the emergency session of the Galactic Council with slow, deliberate steps. The same chamber that had been filled with angry voices condemning humanity just 1 year ago was now nearly empty. Most of the alien delegates were either dead or hiding in bunkers on their homeworlds. The few who remained looked like ghosts, pale and shaking with fear. The Altarian delegate, who had once proudly accused humans of being warmongers, now sat hunched in her chair. Her blue skin had turned gray with stress, and her hands shook as she tried to operate her translator device. The Gorvik ambassador, who had pounded his fists and demanded human punishment, was missing 3 of his 4 arms, lost in a battle with the Wraith pirates. The emergency session had been called to formally request human assistance. The same beings who had voted to censure humanity for unauthorized intervention were now begging for the very thing they had tried to prevent. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. Jang Min-soo had served as a human diplomat for 20 years. He had spent countless hours trying to explain human actions to alien audiences, defending rescue missions that had saved millions of lives. He had been patient and polite even when the aliens questioned human motives and demanded restrictions on human activities. Today, he was not patient or polite. The council president was a different being than before. The previous president had died when the Void Hunters consumed his homeworld. His replacement was a nervous creature who kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting death to appear at any moment. The president began the session by reading a formal apology to humanity. The council admitted that they had been wrong to criticize human protection efforts. They acknowledged that humanity had saved countless lives and prevented numerous disasters. They begged for forgiveness and asked humans to return to their role as galactic protectors. Jang Min-soo listened without expression. Then he stood up and began to speak in a voice that carried clearly through the nearly empty chamber. For 50 years you criticized our methods while enjoying our protection, he said, looking at each remaining delegate. In turn, you called us warmongers when we eliminated threats before they reached you. You said we were too violent when we fought battles you were too afraid to fight. You demanded we follow your rules while we bled to keep you safe there? Altarian delegate tried to interrupt, but Jiang Minsu continued without pause. You wanted committees to decide who lives and who dies. You wanted paperwork filed before emergency rescues. You wanted us to ask permission before saving lives. You got exactly what you asked for. Now you see what the galaxy looks like when those committees are making the decisions. He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. The same display that had once shown a thriving civilization now showed mostly empty space dotted with the burning remains of dead worlds. The Void Hunters had consumed 60% of all explored space, leaving behind nothing but darkness. The Zenthari Empire that had once spanned 300 star systems was down to 12 hidden colonies. The mighty Gorvik Confederation existed only as scattered refugee groups hiding in asteroid fields. The Altarian Republic had lost its homeworld and most of its population to the advancing machine armies, but the Void Hunters were not the only threat. The withdrawal of human protection had awakened every nightmare that had been sleeping in the dark spaces between stars. The Wraith Pirates had grown from small raiding groups to massive fleets that controlled entire sectors. Ancient artificial intelligences had reactivated and begun systematic extermination. Campaigns. Diseased planets that had been quarantined for centuries had broken containment and spread their plagues across multiple systems. Jiang Minsu showed them classified human intelligence reports that documented the scope of the crisis. These were threats that humanity had been fighting in secret for decades, keeping the galaxy safe from dangers the aliens never even knew existed. The plague worlds in the Outer Rim had been developing biological weapons for 30 years. Human scientists had been working constantly to develop countermeasures. While human military forces kept the infected systems under quarantine, the aliens had complained about human restrictions on travel to those areas, never knowing that humans were preventing a galactic pandemic. The Void Hunters had been stirring for decades, sending out scout probes and testing defenses. Human deep space monitoring stations had been tracking their movements and launching preemptive strikes to keep them dormant. The aliens had accused humans of being too aggressive in exploring dangerous regions, never realizing that humans were protecting them from an ancient enemy. The Wraith Pirates had been building their fleets in the dark spaces between galaxies using resources stolen from raids on outer colonies. Human intelligence had been infiltrating their operations and sabotaging their shipyards. The aliens had complained about human military activities in neutral space, never understanding that humans were preventing a massive invasion. Captain Nam Yunji, who commanded the intelligence vessel Hanbok, had prepared a detailed analysis of the situation without human intervention. All of these threats had been free to develop and organize. The timing of their attacks was not coincidental. They had been waiting for humanity to withdraw before launching their coordinated assault. The mathematical models were terrifying. Without human protection, galactic civilization would collapse completely within 5 years. The surviving populations would be reduced to primitive levels, hiding in caves and ruins while monsters ruled the space lanes. The galaxy would enter a new dark age that could last for millennia. The council delegates listened to this information with growing horror. They had thought the current crisis was just a temporary setback caused by bad luck and poor timing. Now they realized it was the inevitable result of removing the galaxy's immune system. The Altarian delegate stood up with tears streaming down her face. She offered her species' entire remaining treasury to hire human mercenaries. The Gorvak ambassador promised to make his people servants of humanity if they would just restore their protection. A dozen other delegates made similar offers, giving up their sovereignty in exchange for survival. Jiang Minsu looked at them with something between pity and disgust. These beings had once been proud leaders of great civilizations. Now they were reduced to begging and offering themselves as slaves. The transformation was complete. Their spirit had been broken along with their power. The offers they made were worthless anyway. Their treasuries were empty, their fleets were destroyed, their populations were scattered. Their governments existed only in name with no real authority or resources. The galaxy they were offering to humanity was already dead, but there was something else in their desperate pleas that made Jiang Minsu pause. It was not just fear for their own lives, but genuine regret for their past actions. Some of them seemed to finally understand what humanity had been doing for them and what they had thrown away. The council president made one final desperate appeal. He admitted that the aliens had been wrong about everything. They had judged humanity by their own standards, applying their own weaknesses and fears to human actions. They had been ungrateful and foolish, and now they were paying the price. He begged humanity to be better than they had been, to show mercy to those who had shown none, to protect those who had rejected protection, to save those who had condemned their saviors. Jiang Minsu stood silent for a long moment, looking at the ruins of the once proud Galactic Council. The chamber that had once been filled with hundreds of delegates now held only a handful of survivors. The galaxy that had once been home to thousands of thriving civilizations was now mostly empty space. Finally, he spoke, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. You have learned what the galaxy looks like without human protection. Now you must decide what you are willing to do to earn it back. The age of taking our sacrifice for granted is over. If humanity returns, it will be on our terms, not yours. The surviving delegates nodded, eagerly agreeing to any conditions humanity might impose. They would accept human leadership, human law, human oversight, anything that would bring back the protection they had lost. But Jiang Minsu was not finished speaking. The galaxy made its choice when it rejected us, he said quietly. Now it must live with the consequences of that choice. The dead cannot be brought back. The destroyed cannot be rebuilt. The trust that was broken cannot be easily repaired. He turned to leave, then paused at the chamber entrance. We will consider your request, he said without looking back, but do not expect an answer soon. The galaxy waited 50 years to drive us away. It can wait a little longer to see if we will return. The chamber fell silent as the human representative walked away. Behind him, the last remnants of galactic civilization sat in the ruins of their great council, wondering if they had just witnessed their final hope disappearing into the darkness. Commander Song Hannah stood on the bridge of her rescue ship, watching the last evacuation shuttle dock with her vessel. The small craft was packed with refugees from a dozen different alien species, all of them survivors from the rimward sectors that had fallen to the Void Hunters 3 years after humanity withdrew from galactic affairs. The shuttle bay was full of beings who had once been proud citizens of great civilizations. The Altarian scientists who had criticized human methods now carried their few possessions in cloth bags. Their crystal cities were gone, consumed by the advancing machine armies. The Gurvak warriors who had called humans cowards now helped elderly refugees walk because they had no strength left to fight. Commander Song had been running these evacuation missions for 2 years now. It was dangerous work that violated direct orders from human command, but she could not stand by and watch entire species go extinct because of political mistakes. Some humans called her a traitor for helping the aliens, others called her a hero. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Statistical reports that came in every month painted a picture of complete civilizational collapse. The galaxy had lost 80% of its population in just 3 years. More than 2,000 worlds had been destroyed or abandoned. Entire star systems had been stripped clean by the Void Hunters, leaving behind empty space where thriving colonies had once existed. The Xanthari empire that had ruled 300 systems was down to 8 hidden colonies scattered across the galaxy. Their great fleets were gone, destroyed in hopeless battles against enemies they could not defeat. Their emperor had died in the final battle for their homeworld, choosing to go down with his flagship rather than surrender. The Gorvak Confederation had fared slightly better, but only because their scattered nature made them harder to destroy. Completely small groups of Gorvak survivors lived in asteroid fields and abandoned space stations, hiding from the Wraith pirates who hunted them for sport. The great Gorvak fortress worlds had all fallen, their massive defenses proving useless against modern weapons. But the physical destruction was only part of the story. The psychological damage was even worse. The alien species that had survived had lost something fundamental: the will to exist as independent beings. They had become completely dependent on human protection during the 50 years of cooperation, and now they could not imagine life without it. Dr. Beijing-yuk, who served as the ship's psychologist, had studied the refugee populations extensively. What he found was disturbing. The aliens showed all the signs of learned helplessness. They had forgotten how to solve their own problems, how to face danger, how to make difficult decisions without human guidance. The Eltarians, who had once been master scientists and engineers, now sat in their refugee camps waiting for someone else to tell them what to do. Their great universities had been destroyed, but even before that they had stopped teaching critical thinking and problem solving. Their students had been trained to follow procedures, not to innovate or adapt. The Gorvak, who had once been the galaxy's fiercest warriors, now cowered at the first sign of danger. Their military traditions had been replaced by reliance on human tactical support. When the Wraith pirates attacked, they ran instead of fighting. Because they had no experience with independent combat operations, the other species were even worse. Some had simply given up, completely choosing mass suicide rather than face the new reality. Ancient civilizations that had existed for thousands of years ended themselves rather than try to adapt to a galaxy without human protection. Commander Song interviewed many of the refugees during the long journey to human space. Their stories were heartbreaking but also frustrating. They all spoke of the same thing: the golden age when humans had protected them from every threat. They remembered it as a time when they could live in peace without worrying about danger, but they had forgotten the cost of that peace. They had forgotten that humans had died to protect them, that human families had been broken by military service, that human worlds had been attacked. While human fleets were defending alien colonies, they remembered only the safety, not the sacrifice that had made it possible. Psychological dependency ran deeper than anyone had realized. The aliens had not just relied on human military protection, they had relied on human decision-making, human problem-solving, human innovation. When faced with any crisis, they had automatically turned to humans for solutions. Now, when crises arose, they were paralyzed. They would form committees and debate and argue, while their worlds burned because they had lost the ability to act decisively. They had become spectators in their own lives, watching events unfold without knowing how to influence them. The refugee children were especially tragic. They had been born into a galaxy protected by humans and had never learned to face real danger. When the attacks began, they could not understand why the humans did not come to save them. Some still believed that humans would return at the last moment like heroes in the stories. Commander Song found herself torn between pity and anger. She felt sorry for the refugees who had lost everything through no fault of their own, but she was also angry at their leaders who had created this situation through their pride and ingratitude. The ordinary people were paying the price for their government's mistakes. The evacuation missions were taking a toll on her crew as well. They had to watch entire civilizations die, knowing they could stop it if humanity chose to act. The rescue ships could save individuals, but they could not save entire species. The scale of the catastrophe was too large for small gestures of mercy. Lieutenant Park Ji-hoon, who served as her tactical officer, had calculated that humanity could reconquer the galaxy within 10 years if they chose to act. Human technology had advanced during the isolation period, while the aliens had fallen behind. The Void Hunters and Wraith Pirates would be no match for modern human fleets, but reconquest would require total war and occupation. The surviving alien populations would need to be protected like children. While new governments were established, it would mean abandoning the dream of equal partnership and accepting the role of galactic overlords. The moral questions were complex. The aliens had rejected human protection and brought disaster on themselves. Did humanity have a duty to save them from their own mistakes? Should humans sacrifice their own people to protect beings who had called them criminals? Should they take responsibility for species that had proven incapable of responsibility? Commander Song had no easy answers. She continued her evacuation missions because she could not stand by and watch genocide. But she knew that rescue operations were not a long-term solution. The galaxy needed more than individual acts of mercy. It needed systematic reconstruction. The refugee camps in human space were growing larger every month, filled with the remnants of once great civilizations. The humans who ran these camps were kind and efficient, but they could not hide their frustration with refugees who seemed incapable of helping themselves. Some refugees had begun to adapt, learning human languages and customs and trying to contribute to their new communities. But many others remained passive, waiting for someone else to solve their Problems they had been broken by the collapse of their worlds and seemed unable to rebuild their lives. The psychological damage would take generations to heal if it ever healed at all. The aliens had lost more than their homes and governments. They had lost their sense of agency, their belief in their own capability. The galaxy had not just been conquered, it had been psychologically destroyed. As Commander Song watched the latest group of refugees settle into their temporary quarters, she wondered if humanity would ever be able to undo the damage. Even if they returned to protect the galaxy, the aliens might never regain their independence. The cycle of dependency could continue forever. The galaxy had chosen pride over gratitude and paid a terrible price. But the cost was not just measured in destroyed worlds and dead populations, it was measured in the loss of something more fundamental. The spirit of independence that had once made these species great. Now they were children again, waiting for their human parents to come home and make everything better. But children eventually grow up, and these species might never recover the maturity they had lost. The galaxy had not just been conquered, it had been infantilized. Song made her decision as she looked out at the stars. The evacuation missions would continue as long as there were people to save, but she would also begin a new mission, helping the refugees rediscover their own strength, teaching them to stand on their own feet again. Even if they never regained their former glory, the galaxy had forgotten how to be strong, but perhaps it could learn again. If someone was willing to teach it, the price of pride had been paid in full. Now it was time to begin the long, slow work of rebuilding not just worlds, but the spirit of independence that made life worth living. 5 years after the withdrawal, humanity watched from the edges of space as the galaxy completed its transformation into hell. Admiral Shindongmin commanded the Memorial Fleet, a collection of ships dedicated to preserving the records of extinct civilizations. His crews had become archaeologists and historians, documenting the death of cultures that had once spanned the stars. The Void Hunters were no longer the galaxy's only threat. The collapse of central authority had awakened every nightmare that humanity had spent decades suppressing. The Wraith pirates emerged from dark space with fleets thousands strong, enslaving entire systems without resistance. The Plague Worlds released their bioweapons into the void, creating zones of death where no organic life could survive. Ancient AI constructs, dormant for millennia, reactivated to find their creators gone and began systematic extermination campaigns. Captain O. Sungwoo led the reconnaissance missions that brought back reports of unimaginable horror. The Altarian homeworld, once a beacon of art and science, had become a tomb world where the last survivors practiced cannibalism in the ruins of their greatest cities. The Gorvik territories were ruled by mad warlords who fed their own people to alien parasites in exchange for temporary protection. The trade routes that had connected civilizations for thousands of years were now hunting grounds for creatures that fed on starship crews. The psychological impact on humanity was profound. They had tried to save the galaxy and been rejected, only to watch it burn in their absence. Many humans called for permanent isolation, arguing that the galaxy had chosen its fate and deserved no mercy. Others pushed for intervention, claiming that humanity's moral duty transcended political betrayal. The debates raged in human space while the galaxy continued its descent into darkness. Dr. Kang Se-yang, humanity's chief synopsicologist, identified the critical factor that made restoration impossible. The surviving alien populations had lost not just their technological capabilities, but their fundamental will to exist. They had become so dependent on human protection that they could no longer conceive of independence. Even if humanity returned tomorrow, the galaxy's civilizations lacked the psychological foundation necessary for rebuilding. The withdrawal had not just removed humanity's protection. It had revealed the spiritual emptiness that lay beneath the surface of galactic civilization. President Yun Miju stood before the human colonial assembly in the Great Hall on New Earth. 10 years had passed since Captain Lee Minho walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the time had come to make the final decision about humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. The hall was packed with representatives from every human colony and settlement. Arguments had been raging for months about what to do next. The galaxy had stabilized in its new state of horror, the last major Alien civilization had fallen 3 months ago when the hegemony of Krell was destroyed by a combined assault from Wraith pirates and rogue artificial intelligences. The choice before humanity was simple in concept but profound in its implications. They could maintain their isolation, building stronger defenses around human space and letting the galaxy continue its descent into darkness. They could attempt reconstruction, spending centuries trying to rebuild civilizations that had proven unable to survive on their own, or they could choose a third path that acknowledged the harsh realities they had. Learned Colonel Lee Tiemann, son of the captain who had led the original withdrawal, presented the military assessment to the assembly. He was a tall man with serious eyes who had spent his entire adult life studying the collapse of galactic civilization. His report was comprehensive and brutal in its honesty. Humanity could reconquer the galaxy within 20 years, he explained. Human technology had advanced significantly during the isolation period while the rest of the galaxy had fallen into primitive chaos. The Void Hunters could be destroyed with modern human weapons. The Wraith pirates could be hunted down and eliminated. The plague worlds could be cleansed and restored, but conquest would only be the beginning. The real challenge would be governing a galaxy full of broken populations who had lost the ability to govern themselves. The surviving aliens would need to be supervised like children, while new institutions were built from scratch. It would mean abandoning forever the dream of equal partnership with other species. The psychological damage to the alien populations was so severe that they could not be treated as independent beings. They had become completely dependent on external guidance and showed no signs of recovering their former capabilities. Even with human help, it might take centuries for them to regain basic competence. Dr. Park Sunmi, the head of the Colonial Psychology Institute, had studied the refugee populations in human space extensively. Her findings were disturbing. The aliens, who had lived under human protection for years, showed no improvement in their ability to make independent decisions. They remained passive and helpless, waiting for humans to solve their problems. The children were even worse. The young aliens who had grown up in human refugee camps could not imagine their species ever being independent. They saw humans as natural leaders and themselves as natural followers. This mindset was so deeply ingrained that it might be permanent. Representative Kim Jae-won from the outer colonies argued for complete isolation. He stood up and spoke with passion about the cost humanity had already paid for trying to help ungrateful aliens. Human soldiers had died protecting worlds that later banned them. Human resources had been spent on beings who called them criminals. Human families had been broken by military service to people who showed no appreciation. The galaxy made its choice, he declared, and now it must live with the consequences. We owe them nothing. Our duty is to our own people, to our own future. Why should we sacrifice human lives to save aliens who rejected our help when it was freely given? His words struck a chord with many in the assembly. The outer colonies had always been more isolated from alien contact, and their representatives were less sympathetic to alien suffering. They had watched the collapse with detached interest, seeing it as proof that humanity was superior to other species. But Senator Cho Mai-rae from the core worlds argued for limited intervention. She was an older woman who had served as a diplomat during the years of cooperation, and she remembered when the galaxy had been a place of wonder and discovery. The current state of affairs horrified her. Even if the aliens had brought it on themselves, we cannot let entire species go extinct because of political mistakes, she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Yes, the aliens rejected our help, but does that mean we should watch them die? We are better than that. We must be better than that. She proposed establishing safe zones around human space where alien refugees could be protected and gradually taught to become self-sufficient. It would not be the old system of protection, but it would prevent complete genocide while slowly rebuilding alien capabilities. The debate continued for hours with passionate arguments on all sides. Some representatives wanted to reconquer the galaxy and rule it directly. Others wanted to maintain complete isolation. A few suggested selective intervention, helping only those alien groups that had shown genuine remorse for their past actions. General An Hyok-shin, who had served with the Memorial Fleet, presented intelligence reports about the current state of the galaxy. The Void Hunters had consumed 90% of explored space and showed no signs of slowing down. The Wraith pirates controlled most of the remaining inhabited systems. The few surviving alien populations were scattered and hiding without intervention. These remnants would be extinct within 5 years. He reported the galaxy would become completely empty except for monsters and machines. The entire history of galactic civilization would be reduced to records in human archives. The economic arguments were complex as well. The galaxy contained vast resources that could benefit humanity, but accessing them would require massive military operations. The cost of reconquest and reconstruction would be enormous, possibly bankrupting human civilization for generations. Dr. Song Yunho, the colonial economist, calculated that rebuilding the galaxy would cost more than building a dozen new human colonies. The resources required could be used instead to expand human civilization into unexplored regions where there were no political complications or moral obligations, but there were strategic considerations as well. The threats that had destroyed the aliens would eventually turn their attention to human space. The Void Hunters were already probing the edges of human territory. The Wraith pirates had begun raiding isolated human settlements. The isolation that had protected humanity was beginning to break down. Colonel Lee Tiemann pointed out that humanity's defensive advantage was temporary. The monsters that ruled the galaxy were learning and adapting. Eventually, they would develop weapons and tactics that could threaten human worlds. Fighting them now, while they were scattered and unorganized, would be easier than waiting for them to unite against humanity. The moral arguments were the most difficult to resolve. Some representatives argued that humanity had a duty to help simply because they were capable of helping. The fact that the aliens had rejected assistance in the past did not change the moral obligation to prevent genocide when possible. Others countered that moral obligations worked both ways. The aliens had forfeited their right to human protection when they chose ingratitude over cooperation. Humans did not owe them anything and should focus on their own welfare rather than repeatedly trying to help people who did not want help. President Yun listened to all the arguments carefully. She had been thinking about this decision for months, weighing the costs and benefits of each option. The easy choices had all been eliminated, leaving only difficult paths with uncertain outcomes. The assembly fell silent as she rose to speak. Her words would determine humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. The decision could not be undone once made. The consequences would echo through history. We have heard many arguments today. She began, her voice steady and clear. Each speaker has raised important points that deserve consideration, but we must remember what brought us to this moment. We did not choose to become the galaxy's protectors. We accepted that role because we saw beings in need and chose to help. She paused, looking around the assembly at the faces of humanity's representatives. The galaxy rejected our help and chose to face its problems alone. We respected that choice even though we knew it would lead to disaster. We have watched civilizations die and species go extinct because we honored their decision to reject our protection. Hall remained silent as she continued. Now the galaxy faces complete extinction. The few survivors beg for our return, but they offer nothing except their gratitude. They cannot pay us for our protection. They cannot contribute to their own defense. They can only promise to be grateful. This time President Yun made her decision with the weight of history upon her shoulders. Humanity will return to the galaxy, she announced, but not as saviors or conquerors. We will establish trading posts and safe harbors. We will offer protection to those who genuinely seek to rebuild, but we will not fight other species' battles or solve their fundamental problems. The new relationship would be based on mutual benefit rather than charity. Alien groups that wanted human protection would need to contribute something valuable in return. Whether resources, labor, or knowledge, those who could not contribute would not be abandoned, but they would not receive priority either. Most importantly, humanity would no longer accept criticism or demands from those they protected. The old system, where aliens could condemn human methods while enjoying human protection, was gone forever. Any species that wanted human help would have to accept human authority in matters of